How does the world's most powerful military lose a war, even a protracted war, against a relatively small group of poorly armed peasant Afghan tribesmen? How does that happen? Well, it happens in two ways. I want to probe here the deeper roots of America's loss in Afghanistan. And here, while I will fault the Biden administration, this is a bipartisan disaster. Let me start by talking about the war itself, which had two phases. The first phase, which lasted only a few weeks. Remember, right after 9/11, the Taliban, which had been responsible for providing safe haven, training ground, here are the monkey bars, to the 9/11 hijackers. They were a part of 9/11, so it was completely right and proper that the United States say, okay, guys, you know what? You're going to pay for it in a very big way. And that big way was to essentially obliterate the Taliban from the seats of power. Kill a lot of them, drive the rest into the mountains, oust them from power in their own country. And that was done. And that was done successfully. It was done quickly. And this was under Don Rumsfeld. Dick Cheney was involved. And it was a boom, boom, boom. And the Taliban was essentially on the canvas. Now, this is really when things began to take a confused turn. Because right after that, the question is, and now what? Now, at this point, a bunch of theories began to arise. There's the Colin Powell theory. I'm going to call it, if you break it, you own it. The idea here is that if you smash a country or smash a government, you somehow own the country. To me, a complete non sequitur, kind of a buffoonish statement. But nevertheless, this was one way of thinking about it. We have a responsibility to rebuild Afghanistan. Why? But nevertheless, the Bush people were like, oh yeah, I guess we have a responsibility. We're the United States. We fixed the world. This was part of that arrogant, United States is going to sort of make the world more like it model. And the other view was, I'd call it the Condoleezza Rice view, because I actually heard it come right out of her mouth. And she goes, well, we're not going to play whack-a-mole. Now, what she means by this is that we're not going to bomb the Taliban and leave, and then let the Taliban come back and take over Afghanistan and start planning another 9/11, and we got to go whack them again, and then they're going to start and we'll leave again. So Condoleezza Rice's point is we sort of need an institutional fix. We need a systematic fix. But what fix? How do you fix another country? Now, the United States did do this, by the way, at the end of World War II with Japan and with Germany. But those were special cases. We're talking about modern industrialized countries that had educated populations. In many ways, they had, if not the infrastructure, which had been destroyed, they had the know-how to make this kind of infrastructure, to be part of, you might say, a global economy of innovation and trade, and perhaps even embrace democracy and human rights, all of that. But Afghanistan had none of that. And so the idea here was to somehow fix Afghanistan, to own it, in Colin Powell's words. But if you ask people, well, what is the standard now? How long are we going to stay in Afghanistan? What are we trying to do? And the answer was always sort of different. Number one, we're trying to create some stability, Dinesh. We're trying to make sure that Afghanistan isn't unstable, okay? But how do you make a country stable? How do you know when you've achieved stability and it's time to get out? The answer is you don't. Second, we're trying to have democracy in Afghanistan. Now, democracy not quite in the American sense, but we're going to take the tribal system, we're going to play around with it, we're going to have some elections, we're going to see if the democratic seed takes in Afghanistan. And so we had some elections, but there were always elections that seemed kind of questionable, polluted by corruption and fraud. And so this democracy was, you may say, a fragile plant at best in Afghanistan. How do you know when democracy has been fully established? You never do. Number three, we're going to promote women's rights. Well, okay, you don't allow women to, you don't let them be forced to wear the burqa. They have a choice of whether to wear the hijab, but the Afghan women are by and large traditional. They're still wearing the hijab. You can't look on the street and count hijabs and go, well, you know what? I think we've advanced women's rights enough. It's time to leave. Or four, we want education and development in Afghanistan. So you set up some schools and you start teaching a few kids and they learn a little bit. And then you go, well, how much is enough? Obviously, we haven't educated all the Afghans. They don't all have high school degrees, let alone advanced degrees. So at what point, the point I'm getting at here is the United States dispatched a massive infrastructure of NGOs and educators and democracy promoters and human rights promoters and blah, 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 all to sort of fix this country. And at no point was it clear when we could get out of there. Meanwhile, contrast the confused, bungling, pompous strategy of the United States with the concentrated, focused Taliban strategy. The Taliban strategy is really simple. Let's hide out in the mountains. Let's make constant guerrilla attacks. Let us take one town after another. Let's try actually to use our local advantage. We know the terrain. Also the fact that we are Muslims like everybody else here. Let's present the US as a foreign imperialist invader, an occupier, and try to mobilize Afghan sentiment against us. Let's kill the warlords one after the other. After all, those guys are thoroughly corrupt. They're being paid by the United States. Let's see if we can, like the Viet Cong did, launch a successful guerrilla operation. And they have. So when you have two sides and one side knows exactly what it's doing, it's purposeful, it's ruthless, it never gives up, and the other side is pompous, bloviating, has no sense of purpose, has no endpoint, has no real even definition of victory, it's kind of obvious which side, in the end, is going to win.